In the grand and silent heart of the Samarkand of old, where the domes of the mosques kissed a sky bruised purple with the coming night, lay the palace of King Shahryar. Within its walls, silence had become a shroud, a heavy, suffocating thing woven from grief and rage. Each night the king took a new bride, and each dawn he took her life, a terrible ritual to staunch a wound in his own soul that would not heal. But tonight was different. Tonight his bride was Scheherazade, the vizier's daughter, and she carried with her not fear, but 1,001 stories. As the last servants padded away on silent feet, leaving the scent of jasmine and amber hanging in the air of the royal bedchamber, Scheherazade turned to the king. The lamplight caught the gold threads in her silken robes and the deep, calm intelligence in her dark eyes. "O great and powerful king," she began, her voice a soft melody, like the gentle murmur of a hidden stream in a desert oasis. "The night is long, and sleep is a shy creature, often eluding those who need it most. If it pleases your majesty, I could tell you a story to beckon it near, a tale to pass the hours until the first call to prayer." The king, his heart a fortress of stone, merely grunted, a sound of weary assent. He did not care for stories, but the girl's voice was soothing, and the silence had grown tiresome. And so, as the moon climbed its silver ladder in the indigo sky, Scheherazade began. "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, let us begin our journey, not in the court of a king, but on the dusty road that stretches from the gates of Baghdad into the endless, whispering desert. For it was on this road that a great quest was born, not of war or of conquest, but of curiosity. The Caliph, Harun al-Rashid, commander of the faithful, sat one day upon his throne, listening to tales of the ancient kings. A traveler spoke of Suleiman, son of Daoud, peace be upon him, and of the magnificent city he had built for his beloved, a city forged not of stone or marble but of gleaming brass, a city now lost to the sands of time. The traveler spoke of bottles of brass found by fishermen, sealed with the very seal of Suleiman, and how, when opened, they would release powerful genii who had been imprisoned for millennia. A seed of longing was planted in the caliph's heart. He wished to see these marvels, to look upon the legendary city of brass, and perhaps find one of these enchanted bottles. He summoned his wisest emir, a man named Talib ibn Sahal, a man whose beard was as white as the snows on a distant mountain and whose eyes held the map of 100 journeys. Talib, the caliph, commanded, his voice echoing in the grand hall, "Gather a caravan of our bravest men. Take with you all the gold and provisions you require. I task you to travel into the great deserts of the West to seek out and bring me a report of this city of brass." And so it was that a caravan, a river of men and camels, flowed out from the gates of Baghdad. The sounds of the city, the clang of the coppersmith's hammer, the call of the spice merchant, the laughter of children, faded behind them, replaced by a profound and ever-deepening silence. At first, the desert was a familiar place of golden dunes and hardy scrub, but soon they passed beyond the known maps, into a land of shimmering heat and stark, lonely beauty. Imagine, O king, the rhythm of their journey. The sun was a hammer of white-hot gold, beating down upon them by day. The sand stretched to every horizon, a vast and rolling ocean of ochre and saffron. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic plodding of the camels' feet, the gentle chime of the bells on their harnesses, and the whisper of the wind as it sculpted the dunes into new and fantastic shapes. The air itself was thick and heavy, smelling of hot sand and the faint, dry scent of distant, sun-baked rock. At night, the world was transformed. The crushing heat would bleed away, leaving behind a cool, refreshing stillness. The sky became a canopy of the deepest indigo velvet, scattered with a dust of diamonds so bright and so numerous, they seemed to be within arm's reach. The men would gather around their small fires, the flames dancing and casting long, flickering shadows. They would sip hot, sweet tea, the steam mingling with the cool night air, and listened to the soft murmur of Talib's voice as he recounted ancient poems or pointed out the constellations that were their guides. For 20 days they traveled, seeing nothing but sand and sky. Then, on the horizon, they saw a structure. It was not a city, but a lone palace of black stone, rising from the desert floor like a monument to forgotten sorrows. There was no sign of life. The great gates were open, hanging askew on their massive hinges. Cautiously, Talib and his men entered. The courtyard was vast and silent. A fountain, now dry, stood in the center, carved in the shape of a roaring lion. The walls were covered in inscriptions, not in a language they knew, but in the strange, angular script of a people long vanished from the earth. Talib, who was learned in the ways of ancient tongues, traced the letters with a reverent finger and translated the words for his men. "O you who enter here," he read, his voice low and solemn, "know that we were a people of great power. Our armies shook the earth, and our wealth could not be counted. We built this palace to last for eternity, but eternity belongs only to Allah. We feasted and we laughed, and we did not heed the warnings of the prophets. Now our halls are home to the wind, and our thrones are seats for the dust. Take heed from our fate, for all earthly glory is but a fleeting shadow." They walked through the silent halls. They saw chambers filled with treasures that glittered in the torchlight, chests overflowing with pearls the size of pigeons' eggs, stacks of gold dinars that had never been spent, bolts of silk that crumbled to dust at the slightest touch. In the great feasting hall they found the skeletons of the king and his court, still seated around a long table clad in rotted finery, their bony hands clutching goblets of gold. A fine layer of sand covered everything, a soft blanket over a dead and silent world. A great sense of melancholy fell upon the men. The treasures held no allure for them now. They took only water from the palace cisterns and continued their journey, their hearts heavy with the lesson of the silent palace. Their path led them onward, ever westward, until the air began to change. A new scent reached them, carried on the wind, the sharp, clean smell of salt. Soon, the desert gave way to a vast, dark sea, a body of water not marked on any map. Along its shore, they saw strange figures, humanoid but covered in sleek, dark fur like seals. These were the sea folk. They could not speak the language of men, but through signs and gestures, they warned Talib of a great darkness that lay across the water, a place of demons and enchantments. They pointed to a mountain that rose from the sea in the distance, a peak of polished black stone that seemed to swallow the light. Undeterred, Talib guided his caravan along the coastline, keeping the black mountain in sight. As they drew nearer, they came upon a strange sight, a horseman of brass, sitting atop a brass steed on a high pedestal. In the horseman's hand was a long lance, and it pointed directly toward the black mountain. On the pedestal was another inscription, "Turn not aside, O traveler," Talib translated, "for beyond this point lies the land of the jinn, ruled by a rebellious spirit who defied the great Suleiman. He and his tribe are bound to that mountain, and they will lure you to your doom with illusions of paradise. Follow the lance, and it will guide you true." Kasa, ha-sa. They obeyed the brass horseman, and for days they traveled in the shadow of the black mountain. Sometimes, from its dark slopes, they would hear what sounded like beautiful music, or see visions of lush green gardens with flowing rivers. But they knew these were but tricks of the jinn, mirages of the soul, and they kept their eyes on the path ahead. Beyond the mountain, the land changed again. They entered a vast, flat plain of cracked, white earth, where nothing grew. The sun beat down, and the white ground reflected its glare until the men were half blinded. And it was here, in the center of this desolate plain, that they finally saw it. At first, it was just a shimmer on the horizon, a line of golden light. But as they drew closer, it resolved itself into walls. Walls of incredible height and thickness, not built of stone or brick, but forged from solid, gleaming brass. They shone under the sun with a light so brilliant it hurt the eyes. This was it, the lost city of brass. The closer they came, the more their awe grew. The walls were perfectly smooth, without a single joint or seam, as if the entire city had been cast in a single colossal mold. They were so high that a man standing at their base could not see the top. The caravan followed the wall for a full day, searching for a gate, but there was none. The city was a perfect, unbroken fortress. Finally, they came to two great towers, also of brass, that rose even higher than the walls. And between these towers were two immense gates of a dark, burnished metal that looked like Chinese iron. The gates were closed fast, locked with enormous bolts and a padlock the size of a small camel. There was no way to open them. Talib and his men set up camp in the shadow of the great walls. The silence here was different from the silence of the desert. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the silence of a place holding its breath. For 2 days they searched for a way in. They tried to use iron bars to pry at the gates, but the metal was too strong. They tried to build a crude ladder, but the walls were too high and too smooth. On the 3rd day, Talib noticed another inscription, etched into the brass wall beside the gate. It was a riddle, a poem of sorts, speaking of those who had come before them, of kings and armies who had tried and failed to enter the city. The final lines read, "Why do you strive against the inevitable? Death is the only true gate. We built this city to defy him, and now he is our only citizen. If you wish to see our works, you must rise above your earthly means." Talib understood. They could not force their way in. They had to be clever. He instructed his men to construct a great scaffold, taller than any they had built before. Using all the wood and rope they had, they worked for a full day, and by evening, a rickety but tall structure stood against the brass wall. Talib asked for a volunteer, a man brave enough to climb to the top and see what lay beyond the wall. A young man, strong and agile, stepped forward. He ascended the scaffold, his comrades holding their breath below. When he reached the top, he peered over the wall into the city. A look of wonder and joy spread across his face. He laughed, a strange, ecstatic sound that echoed in the silence. Then he clapped his hands 3 times, and without another word he leaped from the wall and into the city, vanishing from sight. They heard no sound of his landing. A great fear fell upon the men. What had he seen that would make him do such a thing? Another man, braver than the first, volunteered. He climbed the scaffold, looked over the wall, and did exactly the same thing. He laughed, clapped his hands, and jumped. One by one, 12 of their finest men were lost in this way. Talib was distraught. He forbade anyone else from climbing. He himself, old as he was, ascended the scaffold. He tied a strong rope around his waist, giving the other end to his most trusted men below. "If I try to jump," he commanded, "pull me back with all your might, even if it tears me apart." He reached the top and, bracing himself, looked over the wall. His breath caught in his throat. Below him lay a city of breathtaking beauty, but that was not what held him. Just below the parapet, on the other side, stood 10 beautiful maidens, carved from some magical substance, their forms so lifelike they seemed to breathe. They were beckoning to him, their hands outstretched, their painted smiles promising untold delights. It was a powerful enchantment, a siren's call to the soul. Talib felt an overwhelming urge to join them, to leap into their waiting arms. He laughed and raised his hands to clap. But below, his men were ready. They pulled on the rope with all their strength, and the sudden sharp tug broke the spell. Talib was dragged, struggling and shouting, away from the edge and back down the scaffold. He lay on the ground, panting, the memory of the enchanted figures slowly fading. Now he understood. The city was protected by a powerful magic that preyed on the desires of men. They had to find another way. They decided to search for one of the fabled brass bottles of Suleiman. For days they walked the perimeter of the city, and finally they found what they were looking for. Washed up from some long-dead sea was a small, heavy bottle, made of dark brass and sealed with a lead stopper, bearing the unmistakable, intricate sigil of the prophet King Suleiman. With trembling hands, Talib broke the seal. A plume of thick black smoke erupted from the bottle, spiraling up into the sky, blotting out the sun. The smoke coalesced and solidified, forming the terrifying shape of a gigantic jinn. Its head was in the clouds, its feet on the sand, and its eyes burned like twin furnaces. The men cried out in terror, but Talib, a man of faith, stood his ground. He held up the empty bottle and called out, "O Spirit, I adjure you by the great name engraved on the seal of Suleiman, son of Daoud, to do us no harm." The jinn, who had been imprisoned for 2,000 years, was humbled by the name of his great master. His fiery form bowed low. "Ask what you will, O finder of my prison. I am your servant until you release me, ZCC free." Talib asked the jinn about the city. The spirit told them that it was indeed a city of the jinn, built for a human king who had practiced dark arts. The king and all his people had been struck down by a divine thunderbolt for their wickedness, and the city had been silent ever since. The jinn offered to carry one of them over the walls and back again. Talib chose to go himself. He climbed onto the jinn's vast, smoky palm, and in a blink he was lifted high into the air, over the gleaming brass walls, and set down gently in the city's main square. The stillness was absolute. The city was a masterpiece of architecture. The streets were paved with marble, the buildings adorned with silver and gold. In the market square, the stalls were still laden with goods. He saw merchants of stone, their faces frozen in expressions of surprise, standing before bolts of petrified silk and barrels of solidified spices. He could almost smell the ghosts of cardamom, cinnamon, and cloves on the silent air. He saw a baker, his hand forever, reaching for a loaf of bread that had turned to stone. The entire city was a snapshot of the last moment of its life. He walked to the center of the city, to the grand palace. The gates were open. He passed through courtyards with fountains that held not water, but shimmering, unmoving quicksilver. He entered the throne room and saw the king and queen upon their thrones of ivory and ebony, their crowns still on their skeletal heads, their forms draped in robes that had turned to dust, leaving only the jewels and gold thread behind. Talib felt a profound sadness. He explored the palace, and in the queen's chambers he found her lying on a bed of state, adorned with jewels. She looked as if she were merely sleeping, but her body was as cold and hard as the marble on which she lay. Around her neck was a tablet of gold, and on it an inscription. Talib read the words, a final poem of warning and regret from a queen who had everything and lost it all in a single, fiery moment. His task was done. He had seen the city. He took the golden tablet as proof for the caliph and signaled to the jinn, who lifted him from the silent city and returned him to his men. True to his word, Talib released the jinn, who vanished back into the desert winds from whence he came. The journey back to Baghdad was long and solemn. The men spoke little, each lost in his own thoughts about the fleeting nature of power and the silent testimony of the city of brass. When Talib finally stood before Harun al-Rashid and presented the golden tablet, the caliph listened to the tale with rapt attention. He wept at the story of the city's fall and the vanity of its king. He had the golden tablet hung in his treasury, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that only faith and good deeds endure. And as Talib ibn Sahel rested in his own home, the scent of his wife's rosewater sherbet, a welcome comfort after the dry dust of the desert, he would sometimes close his eyes and see not the gold or the jewels of that dead city, but a single magnificent object he had glimpsed in the queen's tomb. It was a vast tapestry, a hanging of the finest silk from the lands of the Ceres, and it depicted a scene so vivid it seemed to breathe. Woven in threads of silver and gold was the image of a young prince, soaring through a sky of lapis lazuli, mounted not on a steed of flesh and blood, but on a magnificent horse, carved from the blackest, most polished ebony, a creature with wings of ivory and eyes of diamond. And as Talib's fingers had traced the golden thread of the horse's wing, the image seemed to stir, as if the memory woven into the silk was itself a story waiting to be told. A story, O king, that begins in the vibrant kingdom of Persia, on the first day of the festival of Nowruz, the New Year. The great King Sabur had thrown open the gates of his palace, and the courtyard was a kaleidoscope of color and sound. Merchants displayed their finest wares, acrobats tumbled on silken carpets, and poets declaimed verses in praise of the king's generosity. The air was thick with the scent of roasting lamb, saffron rice, and blooming pomegranate trees. As the king sat on his throne, watching the festivities, 3 sages presented themselves before him. Each had brought a marvel to display. The first, a Greek, unveiled a peacock of gold and jewels that, when a spring was touched, would flap its wings and cry out the hours of the day. The second, an Indian, presented a trumpet that, if placed at the city gates, would sound a terrible alarm if an enemy approached, but remain silent for a friend. The king was pleased with these gifts and rewarded the sages handsomely. Then the third sage, a Persian of gaunt and severe aspect, stepped forward. He wheeled before the throne a life-sized horse, carved from a single flawless piece of ebony wood. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, with a saddle of rich brocade and a bridle studded with emeralds. "O great king," the sage said, his voice raspy, "my creation surpasses these trinkets. For this is no mere statue. This horse can carry its rider through the air, faster than the swiftest wind, to any land he desires, and return him in the span of a single day." The court murmured in disbelief. King Sabur, intrigued, asked for a demonstration. "The horse will only obey its master," the sage replied. "Allow your finest rider to mount, and I shall instruct him." The king's son, the handsome and brave Prince Kamar al-Akmar, whose name means Moon of Moons, stepped forward. He was young and eager for adventure, and the idea of flying through the heavens filled his heart with a thrilling excitement. He swung himself into the saddle. The ebony felt smooth and strangely warm beneath him. "Turn this peg on the right of its neck to ascend," the sage instructed, "and the one on the left to descend. To move forward, turn the peg on its head. It will fly wherever you direct your thoughts." "Shul!" Eagerly, the prince turned the ascending peg. The ebony horse gave a silent, shuddering leap. It rose from the ground, smoothly, and without a sound. It hovered for a moment above the astonished faces of the court. Then, as the prince willed it, it soared upwards, higher and higher, until it was but a speck against the brilliant blue of the sky. Imagine the feeling, O king, the sudden, dizzying rush of ascent, the wind whipping through the prince's hair, a wild song in his ears. The world below shrank away, the palace, the city, the green fields, becoming a patterned carpet of color. He was surrounded by an endless ocean of air, the sun warm on his face. He felt a freedom he had never known, a sense of boundless possibility. He laughed, a sound snatched away by the wind. He was no longer a prince bound by duty, but a bird, a cloud, a spirit of the sky. He flew for hours, watching the sun make its slow journey across the heavens. He passed over jagged mountain ranges, whose peaks were crowned with snow, their icy slopes glittering like diamonds. He soared over vast green forests that looked like moss from his great height, and over deserts of rippling sand that mimicked the waves of the sea. He felt a powerful desire to keep flying forever, to see all the wonders of the world from his godlike perch. But as dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and violet, he knew he must descend. He had been so caught up in the exhilaration of the flight that he had forgotten the sage's instructions for landing. He frantically searched for the correct peg. He turned the one on the left, and the horse began a slow, graceful spiral downwards. Below him, a city was lighting its evening lamps, their tiny flames twinkling like fallen stars. He guided the horse towards the largest building, a magnificent palace with a flat, terraced roof surrounded by lush gardens. He landed as softly as a feather, the horse's hooves making no sound on the cool marble tiles. He dismounted, his legs unsteady after so long in the saddle. The air was warm and fragrant, with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and roses. He had no idea where he was, what city this was, or what kingdom. He crept to the edge of the roof and peered down into a lighted chamber. What he saw stole his breath. On a couch of silk cushions sat a young woman of such exquisite beauty that he felt his heart stop in his chest. Her skin was like moon-kissed alabaster, her hair a cascade of black silk, and her eyes were like dark, deep pools reflecting the starlight. She was surrounded by her ladies-in-waiting, but she shone among them as the full moon shines among lesser stars. This, he would later learn, was the Princess Shams al-Nahar, son of the day, and this was the city of Sana'a in the land of Yemen. He watched her for a long time, completely enchanted. When her attendants finally left her to sleep, he crept down from the roof and into her chamber. The princess awoke with a start to see a handsome stranger standing in the moonlight that streamed through her window. She was about to cry out, but he knelt before her and spoke in a voice so gentle and full of adoration that her fear melted away. He told her of his journey, of the magical horse, and of how he had flown across the world, guided by fate to her window. She, in turn, was captivated by his tale and by the noble bearing of the young prince, who had literally fallen from the sky. They talked for hours, their voices soft whispers in the quiet of the night, and by the time the first hint of dawn touched the sky, they had fallen deeply in love. For many nights, their secret meetings continued. He would hide the ebony horse on the roof and spend the hours of darkness with her, returning to his perch before the palace awoke. But such a secret could not be kept forever. The king, her father, noticed a change in his daughter, a new radiance, a secret smile, and he set the chief eunuch to watch her. One night, the eunuch discovered the prince in her chambers. The alarm was raised. The palace guards stormed the room, and Kamar al-Akmar, though he fought bravely, was outnumbered and captured. When the king of Yemen heard the prince's fantastical story of a flying horse, he thought the young man was either a madman or a sorcerer. He had the prince thrown into the deepest dungeon and ordered the ebony horse brought down from the roof. The king's viziers and wise men examined the horse, but they could not understand its workings. It remained a beautiful but inert statue. Meanwhile, back in Persia, King Sabur was mad with grief and anger. He believed the sage had bewitched his son and sent him to his death. He had the old man flogged and thrown into a prison, not unlike the one now holding his son, a world away. Months passed. Prince Kamar al-Akmar languished in the dungeon, his heart aching for his lost love and his freedom. Princess Shams al-Nahar, for her part, fell into a deep melancholy, refusing to eat or speak, her beauty fading like a flower deprived of sun. The king of Yemen, desperate to cure his daughter, sent out a proclamation. Any physician who could cure the princess would be richly rewarded. Many tried, with potions and incantations, but none could heal a broken heart. Then one day, a familiar figure appeared at the court in Sana'a. It was the Persian sage. Having escaped his own prison, he had journeyed far and wide in search of his creation, and his travels had brought him here. Hearing of the silent princess and the strange prince with his tale of a flying horse, he knew he had found them. He presented himself to the king as a powerful astrologer and physician. He was brought to the princess's chambers, where he pretended to perform a complex ritual. Then he went to the king. "O king," he said, "the princess is suffering from a powerful enchantment. The source of the magic is the madman you hold in your dungeon and the black horse he rode. To break the spell, you must bring them both out into the city square at the next full moon. I will perform a ceremony to purify them with fire and incense, and the princess will be cured." He, the desperate king, agreed. On the night of the full moon, the entire city gathered in the great square. Princess Shams al-Nahar was brought out on a litter, pale and weak. Prince Kamar al-Akmar was led out in chains. The ebony horse was placed in the center of the square. The sage began to chant and burn strange-smelling herbs. Under the guise of the ritual, he whispered to the prince, "Your only escape is the horse. When I give the signal, get the princess onto its back and use the peg of ascent." Then the sage turned to the king. "The final part of the ritual requires the princess to be seated on the horse, to absorb its negative energies." The guards lifted the frail princess and placed her in the saddle. The sage then approached the prince. "Now you must mount behind her, to act as a conduit for the evil spirits to leave her body." He unlocked the prince's chains. Kamar al-Akmar leaped onto the horse behind his beloved. He wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time in months, a glimmer of hope returned to her eyes. "Now, O king, witness my power," the sage cried out to the crowd. This was the signal. Prince Kamar al-Akmar wasted no time. He reached forward and turned the peg of ascent. The ebony horse rose silently and swiftly into the night sky, leaving behind a stunned king, a furious sage, and a gasping crowd. The sage had planned to trick the prince and steal the princess for himself, but the prince had outwitted him. Once again, Kamar al-Akmar felt the exhilarating rush of flight, but this time it was a shared joy. He held Shams al-Nahar close, and as they soared through the cool night air, under the gentle gaze of the full moon, he felt her strength returning. They flew back towards Persia, their hearts full of a love that had conquered dungeons and distance. Their journey was not without peril. They landed on an island to rest and were captured by the forces of the Byzantine emperor, who was captivated by the princess's beauty. But the prince, using his wits, managed to feign madness, convincing the emperor that only he could make the horse fly. In a demonstration, he and the princess made their second daring escape, soaring away from the emperor's fleet. Finally, they arrived back in Persia. The prince landed the horse in the courtyard of his father's palace. King Sabur, seeing his son return from the dead, wept with joy. He embraced Kamar al-Akmar and welcomed Shams al-Nahar as his own daughter. A great wedding was held, a celebration that lasted for a month, and the kingdom rejoiced. The treacherous sage was found and brought to justice, and the ebony horse was placed in the royal treasury, a symbol of a love that could fly and an adventure written in the stars. The prince and princess, now rulers in their own right, lived a long and happy life. They loved to fill their court with storytellers and travelers, to hear tales of lands they had not seen. One evening, as the scent of orange blossoms drifted in from the royal gardens, a wandering dervish was brought before them. He was a man of noble bearing, though his clothes were ragged, and he had but one eye. He was a Kalandar, one of 3 royal brothers who had renounced their wealth for a life of wandering, and his story, O magnificent king, began not with a crown, but with its loss. "My father," the Kalandar began, his voice raspy from the road, "was a king, and I was his heir. I was schooled in the arts of war, poetry, and calligraphy, and my life was one of ease and privilege. But my cousin, the son of my father's brother, harbored a deep and venomous jealousy towards me. He plotted my downfall, and one day, while my father was away hunting, he staged a coup. He bribed the palace guard, seized the throne, and sent assassins to kill me. I was warned by a loyal servant and fled the city by night with nothing but the clothes on my back. I wandered for weeks, lost and starving, until I was no longer recognizable as a prince. My fine silks were rags, my hands were calloused, and my heart was heavy with despair. I eventually found work in a distant city as a woodcutter, a life of hard, honest labor. Each day, I would go into the forest, chop wood, and carry it back to the city to sell for a few copper coins, enough for a piece of bread and a place to sleep on a straw mat. It was a hard life, but it was a simple one. I learned the scent of pine and cedar, the satisfying ache of my muscles at the end of the day, the sweet taste of water after hours of toil. The memory of my princely life began to feel like a distant dream. One day, while cutting down a large, ancient tree, my axe struck something hard. It was not a rock. Clearing away the earth, I found an iron ring set into a large, flat stone. My curiosity piqued. I heaved and strained until I was able to lift the stone, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the earth. Lighting a torch from my small fire, I descended into the darkness. The air grew cool and damp. The stairs opened into a magnificent subterranean hall, far grander than any room in my father's palace. The walls were of polished marble, and the room was lit by glowing crystals set into the ceiling. In the center of the hall was a beautiful young woman seated on a golden throne. She was as lovely as a pearl in a locked chest, but her eyes were filled with a profound sadness. She was startled to see me, but when she saw I meant no harm, she told me her story. She was a princess, abducted on her wedding day by a powerful and jealous jinn. He had built this underground palace for her and kept her prisoner here, visiting her once every 10 days. "He will return tomorrow," she said, her voice trembling. "If he finds you here, he will kill you in an instant." But I, who had lost everything, was not afraid. I felt a great pity for this lonely princess, and I vowed to stay with her. We spent the day talking, sharing our stories of loss, and a bond formed between us. For the first time in a long time, I felt something other than the weight of my own sorrow. The next day, the jinn arrived. He was a terrifying sight, a being of smoke and shadow, but the princess, fearing for my life, had hidden me in a secret chamber. I watched through a small crack in the wall as he brought her lavish gifts, jewels, silks, exotic fruits, but she received them with a cold indifference that only fueled his anger. When the jinn left, I emerged from my hiding place. The princess and I grew closer, our shared confinement forging a deep affection. But I was careless. One day, the jinn returned unexpectedly and found us together. His rage was a tempest. The very walls of the chamber shook. I thought he would destroy us both. But he was a jinn of strange and cruel humors. He would not grant me the clean death of a sword. Instead, he drew a strange symbol in the air and uttered a word of power. A searing pain shot through me. My body twisted and contorted. My skin sprouted coarse, black hair. My arms lengthened, and my hands became nimble paws. My voice was lost to me, replaced by the chattering cries of an ape. He had transformed me. He then turned to the princess, his prisoner, and with a single blow struck her down. He left me there, an ape in a prince's body, alone in the silent underground tomb with the one I had tried to save. My grief was immense, a howling storm trapped inside my silent, animal form. I eventually found my way back to the surface and fled into the wilderness. My life as a man was over. I was now a beast, though my mind, my memories, my very soul remained human. I wandered for a long time, living on fruits and nuts, sleeping in trees. One day, I saw a ship moored off the coast. Driven by a desperate hope, I swam to it and climbed aboard. The sailors were amazed to see an ape acting with such strange purpose. They were about to kill me, but the captain, a kind man, saw an intelligence in my eyes and took pity on me. He allowed me to stay on the ship. I tried to show them I was different. I could not speak, but I could write. They gave me a pen and paper, and to their utter astonishment I wrote out my story in the most elegant and beautiful calligraphy. The captain was astounded. He realized I was no ordinary animal. When the ship docked in a great port city, he took me to the palace of the Sultan. The Sultan was a great patron of the arts and was fascinated by the tale of a calligrapher ape. He took me into his court, and I became a strange sort of curiosity, the ape who could write poetry and prose more beautiful than any of his scribes. I lived this way for some time, a strange, melancholy existence, trapped between the world of men and the world of beasts. But my fate was about to change again. The Sultan had a daughter, a princess who was herself a powerful enchantress, skilled in the arts of white magic and ancient lore. When she saw me, she knew at once that I was an enchanted man. She came to me in secret. "Do not despair," she whispered, her voice like the chiming of small silver bells. "I know what you are. The jinn who did this to you is a powerful foe, but I believe I can break his curse. It will be a dangerous battle, and it may cost me dearly." Herosavulacha. I looked at her with pleading eyes, and she understood. She prepared for the magical duel. She drew a great circle on the floor of her chamber, filled with mystical symbols and protective wards. She began a long and complex incantation, her voice rising and falling in a language older than mankind. A great wind swept through the room, extinguishing the lamps. In the darkness, the jinn appeared, drawn by her challenge. "You dare to meddle in my affairs, little sorceress?" His voice boomed. "I dare to right a great wrong," she replied, her own voice steady and clear. And so the battle began. It was not a clash of swords, but a dazzling, terrifying duel of transformations. The djinn became a roaring lion of fire. The princess became a torrent of pure water that extinguished him. He became a giant scorpion with a venomous sting. She became a great eagle that plucked him up and dashed him against the walls. He became 1,000 venomous snakes. She became a mongoose of pure light that devoured them. The room was filled with flashing lights, the smell of ozone, and the shrieking of supernatural energies. Finally, the princess gained the upper hand. She cornered the djinn and forced him to reverse the spell he had cast on me. I felt that same searing pain, but this time in reverse. My ape form melted away, and I stood before her, a man once more. But the victory came at a terrible price. The djinn, in his final moment of defeat, spat a single spark of black fire. It struck the princess. She gave a small cry and fell to the floor. I rushed to her side, but it was too late. The magic had consumed her. She had given her life to restore mine. As she lay dying, a stray spark from the battle struck my left eye, blinding it forever. The Sultan was heartbroken at the loss of his daughter, but eternally grateful to me for my part in her heroic stand. He offered me a place of honor in his court, but I could not stay. The palace was filled with the ghost of the princess who had saved me. I shaved my head and my beard, donned the simple robe of a Kalandar, and took to the road, a wandering prince with one eye and a story too heavy to carry alone. I have been wandering ever since, seeking not a kingdom, but a quiet place, a garden, perhaps, where a man can find peace with his memories. And sometimes, in my travels, I have found such places. I once stumbled upon a garden, hidden deep in a valley, a place of impossible beauty. The flowers there, Your Majesty, were of a kind not seen in our world. Their petals held the light of dusk even at midday, and their scent spoke of a land that lies just beyond the veil of sight, a land of eternal twilight and gentle magic. A land such as the one found by another prince, a prince named Ahmed, who followed not a map, but the flight of an arrow. In the city of Balkh there lived a sultan who had 3 sons, Husrev, Ali, and the youngest, Ahmed. He also had a niece, the Princess Nuranahar, who was as beautiful as she was clever. All 3 princes were in love with their cousin, and each wished to marry her. The Sultan, not wishing to show favoritism and cause strife between his sons, devised a contest. "My sons," he announced, "each of you will take a bow and arrow. You will go to the great plain outside the city and shoot your arrow as far as you can. He whose arrow flies the farthest shall have my consent to marry the princess, the pen." The eldest son, Husrev, shot his arrow, and it landed far across the plain. The second son, Ali, shot his, and it flew even farther, landing near a distant hill. Then it was Ahmed's turn. He drew his bow with all his might, and his arrow soared high into the air, flying so far and so fast that it vanished from sight. The princes and their retinues rode out to find the arrows. They found Husrev's and Ali's, but of Ahmed's arrow there was no sign. They searched for days, but it was as if the arrow had been swallowed by the sky. The Sultan declared that since Ahmed's arrow could not be found, it must have gone the farthest, but this felt like an hollow victory. Ahmed, a prince of great honor, felt he could not claim his bride without proof. He vowed to his father that he would not return until he had found his arrow. He set off on a journey that led him far from the familiar lands of his father's kingdom. He traveled for weeks over mountains and through valleys, asking in every village and town if anyone had seen a fallen arrow. He followed the direction of his shot, a straight line into the unknown. Finally, his path led him to a range of steep, forbidding cliffs. As he was about to turn back, he saw something wedged in a crevice high up on the rock face. It was his arrow. he began the difficult and dangerous climb. When he reached the crevice and pulled his arrow free, the rock behind it crumbled away, revealing the entrance to a dark cave. A cool, sweet-scented breeze blew from the cave's mouth. Hesitantly, he entered. The tunnel sloped gently downwards, and soon he saw a soft, silvery light ahead. He emerged into a vast, sunless cavern, a world unto itself. The ceiling was a dome of glittering crystals that shed a gentle, pearlescent light, like a permanent twilight. The ground was covered in soft, moss-like grass, and strange, luminous flowers grew in abundance. In the center of this magical grotto was a palace built not of stone, but of shimmering, translucent mother-of-pearl. As he approached the palace, a group of ladies, all dressed in robes of floating silk, came out to greet him. They were beings of ethereal beauty, with eyes that shone with a gentle, otherworldly light. Their leader stepped forward. "Welcome, Prince Ahmed," she said, her voice like the sound of wind chimes. "We have been expecting you. I am the Peri Banu, the Fairy Queen, and this is my domain. It was my magic that guided your arrow here, for I have watched you from afar and seen the goodness in your heart. Yil." Ahmed was speechless. He had stumbled into a realm of myth and legend. The Peri Banu led him into her palace, a place of breathtaking beauty. The walls seemed to shift and change color. The air was filled with a soft, enchanting music that had no discernible source, and the scent of unknown, magical blossoms was everywhere. He lived in the fairy realm for many months, and the memory of his old life began to fade like a dream upon waking. He fell deeply in love with the kind and beautiful Peri Banu, and she with him. They were married in a ceremony of starlight and moonbeams, and he became the king of this hidden, magical world. He was happier than he had ever been. Yet, a small part of him remembered his father. After a year had passed, he felt a pang of longing to see him again, to let him know that he was safe and well. The Peri Banu, who could see into his heart, understood. "Go, my love," she said, "visit your father, but do not tell him of me or of this place. The world of men and the world of fairies are not meant to mix too freely. And do not stay longer than you must, for I shall miss you terribly. Riaz." She gave him a magnificent horse, swifter than any mortal steed, and he rode out of the cavern and back into the sunlit world. It took him only a few days to reach his father's city. The Sultan was overjoyed to see his youngest son, whom he had long thought dead. His brothers, Husrev and Ali, however, were not so pleased. They had both since married other princesses, but their jealousy of Ahmed remained. They saw his fine clothes and the magnificent steed he rode, and they were filled with envy and suspicion. Where had he been? How had he acquired such wealth? Ahmed stayed for a month, but his heart longed to return to his fairy queen. He bid his father farewell and returned to the hidden realm of the Peri Banu. This pattern continued for some time. Every few months, Ahmed would visit his father, each time appearing more prosperous and content, which only fueled his brothers' resentment. They were determined to discover his secret. They set spies to follow him, but Ahmed's magical horse was too swift. Then they devised a cruel plan. They knew the Sultan was growing old and frail, and they used his love for Ahmed against him. They convinced the Sultan that Ahmed must possess some great secret to happiness and prosperity, and that, as a loving son, he should share it with his family. The next time Ahmed visited, the Sultan, prompted by his elder sons, made a strange request. "My son," he said, "your wealth and good fortune are a wonder to behold. I ask of you a proof of the power you command. Bring me a tent, small enough to be held in the palm of a hand, but large enough to shelter my entire army when it is opened." Myra. Ahmed was troubled. He knew such a thing could only be accomplished with magic, and he had promised the Peri Banu he would not reveal her existence. He returned to the fairy realm with a heavy heart and confessed his father's request to his queen. The Peri Banu smiled gently. This is the work of your brothers, jealousy, my love, not your father's desire. But do not worry." She went into her treasury and returned with a small, intricately carved ivory case. Inside, folded into a tiny square, was a canopy of the finest silk. "This is the tent you seek," she said. "Give it to your father, Nue." Ahmed returned to the Sultan's court and presented the gift. His brothers scoffed at the tiny object. But when Ahmed took it out to the great plain and unfolded it, the tent began to grow. It expanded and expanded, its silken roof rising, its walls spreading, until it covered the entire plain, a pavilion vast enough to shelter not one, but 10 armies, with room to spare. The Sultan was amazed, and the brothers were silenced, their faces dark with envy. But their jealousy was not sated. They went to the Sultan again. "Ahmed's magic is great," they said, "but can it sustain us? Ask him to bring you a silver platter with 4 golden bowls, one filled with a food that never diminishes, no matter how much is eaten, and the others with wines that never run dry." Again the Sultan made the request, and again the troubled Ahmed returned to his queen. The Peribanu, ever patient, provided him with the magical platter. He presented it to his father, and a great feast was held. The entire court ate and drank from the magical bowls, yet they remained ever full. The brothers were now consumed by their dark feelings. They devised one final, terrible test. They went to the Sultan and said, "Father, your son clearly commands powerful spirits. There is one last thing we must know. Is his power for good or for evil? Ask him to bring you a man no more than 1.5 feet tall, with a beard 30 feet long, who carries an iron club weighing 500 pounds that he can swing with ease." This time, the Sultan was hesitant, for the request sounded monstrous. But his sons were persuasive, and he reluctantly agreed. When Ahmed heard this demand, he was truly afraid. He felt his brothers were trying to force him to reveal a dark and dangerous side of his secret world. He returned to the Peribanu and told her of the request, his voice full of shame and dread. For the first time, he saw a flicker of anger in his queen's eyes. "Your brothers go too far," she said, her voice cool. "They seek to destroy you with their envy. The creature they describe is my own brother Shabar, a jinn of immense power and a fiery temper. To summon him is a dangerous thing, but if they wish for a monster, then a monster they shall have." She gave Ahmed the instructions to summon her brother. He returned to his father's court, and in the great hall he performed the ritual. The ground trembled, and a fearsome jinn appeared, exactly as described. Tiny in stature but radiating immense power, with a beard that coiled around him like a great serpent and a colossal iron club resting on his shoulder. "Why have you summoned me, brother-in-law?" Shabar roared, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. Trembling, Ahmed pointed to the Sultan and his 2 brothers. "They wished to see you." Shapar's fiery eyes fell upon the 2 elder princes. He could smell the stench of their jealousy. He raised his mighty club. "So these are the insects who have been troubling my sister's husband?" he bellowed. "Shall I crush them for you?" Husrev and Ali fell to their knees, begging for their lives. The Sultan, terrified, pleaded with Ahmed to save his sons. Ahmed, whose heart was good, asked the jinn to spare them. Shabar, grumbling, lowered his club. He gave the 2 princes a look of such terrifying contempt that they fainted from fear. Then, with a final nod to Ahmed, he vanished. Husrev and Ali never troubled their brother again. They had seen the power that lay behind his gentle nature, and they were thoroughly humbled. The Sultan, realizing the danger his sons' envy had placed them all in, begged Ahmed's forgiveness. Ahmed knew he could no longer live between 2 worlds. He said his final goodbyes to his father and returned to the grotto of the Peribanu, never again to set foot in the world of men. He lived out his days in perfect happiness and peace with his magical queen, in a land where the light was always soft, the music was always sweet, and jealousy had no shadow. And so the prince found his peace just as the dawn finds the edge of the sky. The stories of men and jinn of brass cities and ebony horses, fade like dreams upon waking, leaving behind only the echo of their wonder. The calendar continues his endless journey, the memory of the fairy garden, a balm for his weary soul. The tapestry in the dead queen's tomb still shows a prince soaring through the heavens. And in the great desert, the city of brass still stands silent under the sun, its walls holding the memory of 1,000 forgotten nights, much like this one. The first faint hint of gray was beginning to soften the deep indigo of the night sky outside the palace window. The flame in the oil lamp flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that were now beginning to recede. The scent of jasmine from the gardens seemed to grow stronger, heralding the coming of the morning. Scheherazade's voice, which had been a steady, mesmerizing river of sound, slowed to a gentle murmur, and then fell silent. The king, who had been lying still, his eyes closed, had not been asleep. He had been adrift on the currents of her tale, his own dark thoughts for once banished by visions of silent palaces and starlit flights. The heavy stone of his heart felt, for the first time in a long time, a little lighter. He opened his eyes and looked at her. In the soft pre-dawn light he saw not just the vizier's daughter, but a weaver of worlds, a purveyor of wonders. "The sun rises," Scheherazade said softly, her voice now barely a whisper, "and my story must fall silent for now. The day demands its due, and the teller of tales must yield to the light." She lowered her gaze, awaiting his command, the command that had sealed the fate of so many before her. But the king remained silent for a long moment, listening to the first stirrings of the palace, the distant call of a bird. "Your story is not finished," he said at last, his voice rough from disuse. "No, your majesty," she replied. "The tapestry of tales is vast, and we have followed but a single thread. There are countless others, stories of fishermen and kings, of enchanted islands and cunning thieves, of love that redeems and magic that transforms." She paused, then added, her voice full of a quiet promise, "Tomorrow night, if I am granted life, we may follow another." The king looked towards the window, where the sky was now blushing with the first pale rose of dawn. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. And in that simple gesture, Scheherazade knew she would live to see another sunset and to weave another spell of words in the long and silent night.